Business in the New Economy. We are excited to bring you this economic update, which we traditionally do each year as a part of our state of Bossier. I'm Lisa Johnson. I'm the president of the Bossier Chamber of Commerce, and so I will be your host today and just kind of give you some housekeeping remarks here. If you have any questions while we hear from our speaker, Dr. Patrick Scott, please put them in the chat box, either for everyone to see or send them directly to Jessica Hemingway, our producer for today's event. She will read your questions aloud when the time is appropriate, and we will ask you to unmute if you'd like to dialogue with Dr. Scott as he answers. So we're also on Facebook Live, so welcome to those that are watching us on Facebook. And if you have any questions, be sure to put those down in the comments. We'll be looking for those and we will address those as appropriate. So I would like for you to join me in welcoming Patrick Scott, Assistant Professor at Louisiana Tech in the Department of Economics and Finance, to talk about the latest employment and housing report numbers, as well as the trends over the past several years. And I was telling him that I just came from a ribbon cutting of another growth opportunity. We just opened another road and intersection in North Bossier at Linton Road, and it's called West Linton and Fairburn, and is where our new Kingston Elementary and Benton High School is located. So we're growing, looking for ways to ease traffic and help with safety measures and what have you. And looking forward to Dr. Scott today giving us some reality of what's been happening and going on. So Dr. Scott teaches macroeconomics, monetary theory, and research methods at Louisiana Tech, and also serves as the director of the Center for Economic Research. So Dr. Scott, I turn it over to you. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa, for having me. I really appreciate it. This is just a fantastic opportunity. I've been wanting, as I've taken over the director position for the Center for Economic Research, I've been wanting to find new and unique ways to kind of plug in Louisiana Tech and to really kind of reach out and serve the community. So this is just an excellent opportunity. I thank you so much for having me. So I've kind of prepared a little bit of visuals. I've learned over the time that whenever you teach economics or go over an economic concept, a little bit of visual goes a long way about this, especially with a little bit of humor thrown in there whenever possible. So as Lisa mentioned, I am a professor. Please, if you have questions, Jessica, feel free just to interrupt me. You're not going to throw me off my game, but at the same time, being a professor, I will certainly go well over time if you let me. I can be a little long-winded, so if for some reason I say too much, just shut me off. You won't hurt my feelings. All right, so I thought I would start this whole discussion with just a little bit of some brief context about Shreveport-Bossier City and its position within the state of Louisiana. And usually whenever we look at geographic regions, we focus on what are referred to as metropolitan statistical areas. And there's 9 of these areas within the state of Louisiana. Shreveport-Bossier City is currently the 4th largest in the state. However, that may not be fully accurate. It was only just barely, it almost tied really with Lafayette. And we haven't received the 4th quarter numbers at the MSA level for any of the MSAs within the nation. So we're still waiting on those numbers. And when those happen, we kind of get the full 2020 picture. And I have a feeling Shreveport-Bossier City is going to take the number 3 slot right behind Baton Rouge and the New Orleans-Metairie MSAs. So I fully expect Shreveport-Bossier City to kind of tick up a little bit for at least for 2020. Now, a lot of people ask me, why is the Louisiana economy the way that it is? So if you look at and kind of rank all of our states, Louisiana is actually dead in the middle of all of our states. It's 24th in terms of the size of the economy. However, if you look at just about any other metric, economic growth, the growth rate of wealth, growth rate of wages and income, it actually falls well below into the bottom of the pack. And so a lot of people wonder, okay, why that? Why is that? And there's a handful of different reasons, but one particular metric that kind of helps to explain that is in the second bullet point, the ratio of total value added to total value of economic output. Now, this ratio for any state should be less than 1 or less than 100 if we're going to turn that into a percentage point. But for Louisiana, this number is right at about 47.1%. And that when it drops below 50%, that means that the state is producing predominantly intermediate goods. It's not producing enough final goods and services. And this is kind of important because it's the last step in that value chain that actually produces a lot of wage growth and a lot of economic wealth for a geographic area. And so Shreveport, Bossier City is a bit higher. It's actually helping to drive up the state numbers. That's it right at 48.8. So that's good. But generally, this is an area of opportunity for the state because we produce so many intermediate goods that we then export to other states who then go on to produce final goods and services with those intermediates. So we are effectively ceding the largest economic benefit of that output to other states. And that's kind of important. If we just compare this directly to our neighbors to the west, to Texas, this number is around 67%. So, I mean, it's a considerable difference in terms of long-run economic wealth for the state. Average household income within the Shreveport Bossier City MSA is much higher than the average state, which is good, 128,000. And if we look at all of the various industries that Louisiana produces, about 70% of them are represented within the Shreveport Bossier City MSA. This is one of the highest that we see of all of the MSAs. You all are exceptionally diversified in terms of the industry output that you have. That poses both opportunity and challenges as well. So, I mean, it's a challenge in that there's not necessarily a large codify push for just a handful of industries that can really drive policy making. But it's good because when those certain industries see downward dips, it doesn't devastate the regional economy. So it has both good and bad components when that happens. The last issue of our real report that we produce here, it's a quarterly report that the Center for Economic Research produces, and I can provide links to Lisa and Jessica that can go out to everyone. But the last issue of the real report, we did a section on house prices in all of the MSAs. And one of the things that we found is that house prices were incredibly stable for Shreveport, Bossier City. You all have some of the most stable dynamics of any of the MSAs, exceptionally affordable housing, but the growth rate was just linear and just didn't change that much. You didn't see the rise of house prices that accompanied the housing bubble in the early 2000s. And then, of course, when that bubble burst and house prices collapsed nationwide, you all didn't see the collapse. You just saw steady growth. And then as we're seeing kind of an uptick in housing prices for the state, you all are just seeing kind of constant growth, although there's going to be a caveat to that, and I'll talk about that towards the end. So right now, we've seen a lot of stimulus money that has been a major focal point of national politics. Approximately $3.8 billion worth of stimulus dollars have entered Louisiana or will be in the next month or two. Shreveport Bossier City is expected to see 18% of that. So there's going to be a good influx of cash. Now, how that is spent is still kind of yet to be seen. A lot of individuals are paying down debt with it. Some people are saving it. So just kind of there's a wide range of possible outcomes in terms of how that is going to be spent. But there is going to be a considerable portion of the total state allocation for that will be coming to Shreveport Bossier City. The employment picture, which we're also going to talk about here going forward, is looking better for Shreveport Bossier City, but at the same time, it's still down about 9.2% from pre-pandemic levels. And it's tapering off. And so that's going to be something that we're going to have to keep an eye on. It's tapering off for all MSAs as well as in the state in general. But that's going to be something that's that policymakers are really going to have to start to really tailor make policies or edit existing policies so that they don't discourage employment. And then if we look at just pricing parity for Shreveport Bossier City compared to its neighbors, you all are approximately 2% below, which is good. I mean, basically goods and services are competitively priced in that regard. So that's a positive for this MSA. Do we have any questions that we'd like to answer before we keep on going?
Not any yet, but if you do have some, you can put them in the chat box and we will ask them.
Fantastic. All right. Well, then we'll keep on going. I've got a few graphs to show because there would not be a good economics talk without some graphs. I love me some data. So yeah. So right now, I wanted to really kind of focus this talk on the two big drivers whenever I look at a particular geographic region, and that is what's happening to employment and wages, and then also what's happening to the wealth picture, particularly the broader context of wealth. And that usually the best indicator for that is going to be the housing market, because for most individuals, a home is the largest asset that they own. So I'm going to focus predominantly on labor market and housing market, but I promise not to go too far over the top. So what I've plotted here is the unemployment rate, both for the state and for the Shreveport Bossier City MSA. And I'm going to be making these slides available as well to everyone. When you get it, will be an HTML file. So when you double click on it, it will open up in your web browser, not as like a PDF. And the reason that is because you can then drag your cursor over it and you can actually observe some of the data. So there's a few individual time periods that we should look at with regard to the unemployment rate. The first is going to be what's happening here. This is Katrina. Of course, Katrina pops in and really takes a battering ram to the state economy. And this has kind of left some lasting scars in certain areas, not so much so for Shreveport Bossier City, but definitely so for both the New Orleans and Baton Rouge MSAs. But we see, of course, a sharp almost doubling of the unemployment rate, but then it quickly reverses course. And this is kind of what we were hoping would happen with COVID, is that we would see a sharp spike, but then it would quickly reverse course. And it's kind of reversed course, but it's not fully undone itself. As you can see, though, the unemployment rate for Shreveport Bossier City was largely unchanged. And so we did see kind of a corresponding drop with the state numbers. And so it followed suit with the state a little bit, but the major movements in that, it didn't match, which is not necessarily surprising. Now, this was an exogenous shock to the state economy. So it was something that we didn't anticipate, but it directly impacted the state economy. This is a very different type of recession than what we saw in the 2008, 2009 time period as a result of the housing market crash. That doesn't directly impact Louisiana, but because Louisiana produces predominantly intermediate goods, there was a shock in demand nationally, and that went back up the supply chain to Louisiana. And so we actually don't see our topping out of our unemployment rate at the state until 2010, when officially the national economy has already started to recover. And so we kind of saw this with a lag, but we also didn't see it as bad as other states did. So we were kind of insulated from this shock a little bit. Consequently, as we recovered, the unemployment rate starts to slowly tick back down, both for the state and Shreveport Bossier City, but it doesn't actually hit the lows that the actual national economy did. So right around in the latter part of 2018, 2019, we're hitting unemployment rates below 3%, or pardon me, below 4% into the 3% range. And we don't benefit from that because we don't see that type of low unemployment rate. So that's good and bad. So we don't see the negative shock so much in full. We don't hurt as much in the times of hurt, but we also don't gain as much in the times of plenty. Of course, when COVID hit, COVID became more of a direct impact on the state economy, as it was an impact on every state economy. And we see a large scale shock both to the state and to the Shreveport-Bossier City MSA. Again, we've recovered some of that, but we're still not back to pre-pandemic levels. So if we look at this from an employment picture, and the actual this is just private employment. So I'm not capturing government employment here. And this is just for Shreveport-Bossier City. And because this is all in thousands of people, I didn't put the state here because the state numbers would be, of course, much larger, and it would kind of not show the dynamics of what's happening within the MSA here. We can kind of see that for about a decade, Shreveport-Bossier City was effectively flatline. It's oscillating up and down, but there's a long run average there attached to that. Then of course, COVID hits, and we see a sizable drop in employment, and we've recovered. But here, this is where I'm calculating that 9.2% in terms of recovery. We've recovered approximately 15,000 jobs. That's great, but it still doesn't do enough to kind of stop the hurt that the regional economy is experiencing right now. The interesting dynamic that I'm seeing here within Shreveport-Bossier City, and this is different from what we're seeing at the state level and also what we're seeing in other MSAs. And I kind of find this interesting, and I don't necessarily have a good explanation for it, but I can at least motivate the discussion. Average weekly earnings, they tend to go up and grow over time, kind of indicating wealth effects there. And so that's good. This is all real dollars as well. So this is all, it's not nominal. But what we do see is for most of the state and also for other MSAs, we start to see a downward tick in wages happening at about here early on in the COVID recession that we don't see for Shreveport-Bossier City. The wages continue to grow, but then in November, all of a sudden they start to fall. So I don't know exactly why we're seeing this downward tick in wages, because this does not capture any policy efforts. This does not capture any movements in the unemployment benefits or things like that. This is just wage data. And so we're starting to see some type of a pullback here. And I'm not entirely certain why we're seeing that, but it's a sizable decrease in weekly earnings. If we pivot more to the housing market, though, we again see a relatively different picture for the when we compare and contrast the state with Shreveport-Bossier City. So here, the Department Federal Housing Agency produces house price indices. These are constant quality, and that should be noted, and that may be important to the discussion later on. But effectively, it's kind of representing the average household or average house price. And we've got that plotted as an index value. So it's all in real terms and trending up over time. Now, we can see the blue line again. This is the blue line is the state. The red line is Shreveport-Bossier City. And we can see more of a constant growth trend for Shreveport-Bossier City house prices, whereas we see more of the national dynamics inherent in the Louisiana numbers. So in the beginning of the housing bubble, we start to see an acceleration in house prices in Louisiana as the state proper in general. But then, of course, when that bursts, we see the downward tick in house prices. But Shreveport-Bossier City just sees a flattening. It's more insulated than the state numbers itself. It's still growing, still positive, but the growth rate has kind of stabilized. So it just grows at a smaller rate. And then it just kind of continues on with this linear growth trend for about the past 12 years or so. which is kind of interesting. A few blips downward here and there, but they largely reverse course. Now, starting here, we're starting to see more of an acceleration in the state numbers, but we don't see that acceleration in Shreveport-Bossier City. That's also going to be important as we go to the next graph. The median listing price is starting to diverge for Shreveport-Bossier City from the state numbers. And this is something that, again, is difficult to square given my anecdotal discussions with other real estate developers. And I've talked to a handful of people here in the Ruston area, as well as a couple in the Shreveport-Bossier City area. And all of them are kind of indicating the same thing. This is a white hot housing market. And so that's generally good, but the data kind of says a slightly different story, particularly for Shreveport-Bossier City. So we certainly are seeing, as we kind of escalate into the COVID recession, a kind of increase in in the median listing price for houses. But for Shreveport-Bossier City, this is starting to tick downward, and we're losing about right around 13%. From their peak, which is happening here right around July. So sometime in the past half year, some of the underlying dynamics of what's happening in the housing market are starting to shift and move around a little bit. So the listing prices are starting to decline, whereas for the state they're going up. Finally, active listing. This is also something that diverges from the state. I don't put the state numbers here because, again, it will skew the scale of this and you don't see the dynamics for the MSA. But active listings for the state are climbing while active listings for Shreveport-Bossier City are declining, and declining not in measurable terms. So, I mean, just in a year out, I mean, we're dropping over 50%. For the number of houses actively for sale. This could indicate that we're just selling existing supply of houses and we're not developing new houses yet, which would make sense. But we are starting to see new housing starts tick up nationally and also at the state level that we're not seeing in Shreveport-Bossier City. So the housing market is starting to cool a little bit. Which may have some important implications for overall economic wealth in the longer term picture. Like I said, I usually like to focus on both the labor market and the housing market because of its indicator of what's happening on the consumer side, what's happening to wealth numbers, because that usually also has broader implications for what's happening with individual businesses and especially from like a retail side.
So we do have a question.
Fantastic, fire away.
From Matt. He says, as financial institutions emerge from the uncertainty of the pandemic, there have been nationwide reports of banks wanting to engage in more mergers and acquisitions. Do you anticipate this bleeding into the Shreveport-Bossier City market, and how might that impact the local economy?
It's difficult to know exactly how that will impact the regional economy. There's a couple of things at play here. The passing of Dodd-Frank makes creating a nationally chartered bank exceptionally difficult. And so we've actually seen remarkably few new nationally chartered banks since 2015. And so ever since then, there's been a consolidation tidal wave, so to speak, happening here. And yeah, I kind of think that's likely to continue until we start to repeal some of those regulatory hurdles. Is that likely to impact? I don't know. I would imagine yes, but I can't necessarily speak for sure. I haven't looked at the specifics of small regional banks within the Shreveport-Bossier City MSA. But if it's anything like what's happening at the state level, yeah, I would imagine.
Can you tell us again where your housing market statistics are coming from?
Sure. Okay. So both the active listings and the median house listing price, those are all coming from Realty Track, and the housing price index come from the Federal Housing Authority.
Okay, any more questions from anyone? Lisa asks, do you have anything that you recommend that we should be looking at to better understand that downward trend you were talking about with the housing market?
I think the key is going to really digging into this is going to have to be understanding new housing starts. And getting those numbers at the MSA level is not necessarily the easiest task, especially historical data. You can find them just like in the past year or so, but much beyond that, it becomes difficult to kind of pull out new housing starts at the MSA level. But new housing starts, they kind of represent increased investment. And I would think in a vacuum, as we have such large scale stimulus, that largely becomes savings for the vast majority of individuals. And so then they take that savings, that becomes investment in the next period of time. And so that's always where new housing starts in the economy. It doesn't actually start in the consumer side. New housing is actually a growth and investment. So I would think that this would start to tick up at some point, especially if we start to sell down existing inventory. But the proof will be in the pudding on that.
Thank you. This is Lisa. I was just curious, and I think the key words you put that you communicated there was investment. And with this being from, being presented by the Bossier Chamber, so the business group business industry is very interested in this. And so, of course, we're wanting more businesses to invest in our region. And so we are looking for all of those qualities of how do we market and promote it so that businesses do move here, and then that drives the consumer side. And we talked before we started that it's vice versa the other way. So just kind of seeing those downward trends, I was like, that's just very interesting to me, because it appears everywhere I drive, a new neighborhood's popping up, another one's being plotted, and it's all over Bossier Parish. If I talk Bossier specifically.
And that's the thing that I can't delineate from. That's the Bossier Parish versus the Shreveport side. It's very difficult to disentangle those numbers. And so there could be kind of a center of gravity effect happening with Shreveport that becomes relatively difficult for us to disentangle. And so that could be anecdotal, it could be systematic. It's kind of difficult to say. But also I should mention that the state economy is happening. There's some churn, movement happening right now within the state economy. And we're seeing this nationally as well, but I'm seeing it both at the state level in various industries. Those industries that are able to retool, that are able to adapt and those that aren't, they're falling by the wayside, and falling by the wayside exceptionally quickly. One of the hottest industries, especially here north of I-20, is biomedical manufacturing. I would not have expected that 3 years ago. I can see it now in this environment, absolutely, but I never would have seen that coming to North Louisiana. And so I hate to be kind of bleak on this, but this truly is Darwinian selection at its finest, because those businesses that are able to adapt, they thrive in this environment. And those that cannot, they close up shop relatively quickly. So we are seeing a lot of high paying jobs coming, a lot of technical manufacturing jobs, a lot of skills based jobs coming, but we're also seeing an incredible amount, unfortunately, of low skill jobs that are getting turned over, and those are getting turned over much faster. And so that kind of poses a problem that we're seeing here. Couple that with some really cavalier economic policy with regard to benefits for the unemployment. And I don't want that to be misconstrued, but I mean, the AP this week actually produced a report that said that the Louisiana Workforce Commission has misallocated $405 million in unemployment benefits. So this isn't me throwing out hyperbole. That's a concern. That's cavalier policy that can possibly be impacting this and shouldn't be impacting this.
Well, we really greatly appreciate you joining us today. Are there any other questions out there that anyone would like to ask? I know we have some bankers with us today, financial institutions, some education institutions, and some of our local economic developers. This is a little different, again, as you said, in this environment. I think that is some of the key words of changing in this environment. And we've always done this as a part of our State of the Bossier, and we can't exactly have dialogue when we're sitting in a conference room. So here on a Zoom meeting or Facebook Live, we can have that dialogue. So are there any other questions or comments out there?
It never fails that someone has a question after the meeting's ended. So if you do have any questions, feel free to email me. My email address is on the tech website, so I'm relatively easy to find.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Jessica is our producer. What do we need to, anything else to do? We're good? Okay. Well, Dr. Scott, thank you so very much for joining us today. Again, if you've joined us at the end here, we've had Dr. Scott, who is the assistant professor at Louisiana Tech Department of Economics and Finance, has been speaking with us today on the latest employment and housing reports, as well as the trends for the past several years and a couple of decades. So thank you so much, Dr. Scott, for being with us today. And you had put your first slide up with your contact information if anyone has any questions for you directly, and they can contact you. So thank you again for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you all as we continue our April annual meeting month for the Bossier Chamber of Commerce. Next Thursday, on our Thursday date, we're going to go back to the networking side and have a lot of fun and do some 80s trivia. And then on the 22nd is our annual meeting, and we'll be offering that in a hybrid format at the Bossier Civic Center in person and also on an online version. So we look forward to seeing everyone as we continue through this month of April. Again, thank you, Dr. Scott.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.